They blew up my tool shed, released my cattle, and tried to seize my land over fake HOA dues. Their mistake, thinking I was just a rancher. Turns out I'm a federal judge. And that old wooden bridge they tore down? Yeah, federally protected. Now they're facing subpoenas, marshals, and a community cookout where the main course is legal karma. HOA Karen thought she could rezone me into submission. I rezoned her into a federal investigation. The gravel shifted beneath my tires as I rounded the bend toward home, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the hills of Silverwood. I was exhausted. 10 hours in court arguing a land dispute that should have taken 30 minutes, but the sight ahead sobered me like a slap of ice water. The bridge was gone. Just gone. My foot eased off the gas as disbelief choked my breath. Where there used to be a proud wooden span, built by my grandfather in 1948, restored by my father in 86, and maintained by me every spring, there was now nothing but jagged planks, mud, and silence. A few broken beams poked from the creek like bones, half submerged, some drifting, others stacked in a makeshift pile like firewood. I killed the engine, jumped out of the truck, and ran. My boots skidded on wet dirt as I reached the edge, heart hammering. I stood there, fists clenched, trying to make sense of it. There was a sign flapping smugly in the wind. Structure removed, Silverwood Preserve, HOA, for community safety compliance. It was nailed into the same tree where my grandfather had carved our initials as a boy. I stared at it, stunned. The HOA? My land isn't even under their jurisdiction. Silverwood Preserve had made that clear 6 months ago when I refused to join their optional extended governance program. Optional, my ass. They said they didn't care about my ranch. Now they'd apparently cared enough to bulldoze 3 generations of legacy and call it compliance. That wasn't just trespass, that was desecration. I didn't scream, didn't call. I pulled out my phone and started documenting wide angles, detailed shots, the sign, the serial numbers on the wood if I could find any. Evidence, not emotion. That bridge wasn't just sentimental. It was on the Federal Historical Structures Registry with a preservation status that made it untouchable without a mile of paperwork and a federal review. But I wasn't going to tip my hand, not yet. Let them think I'm just a tired old rancher who drives a dusty Ram and wears the same boots year-round. They didn't know me. They didn't know that the same hands hauling fence wire yesterday signed injunctions from the bench today. They didn't know that Judge Thomas Rourke sat on the federal circuit court in Denver, and my Rolodex included 3 U.S. Marshals, 2 senators, and a clerk who owes me 6 favors and a case of scotch. I heard footsteps behind me, heavy, familiar. Martin, my ranch hand for the last 12 years. Sweet hell, he muttered, looking at the mess. Looks like a tornado hit it. I didn't say anything. He squinted at the sign, then back at me. Wasn't this outside their zone? Still is, I said, deadpan. Or was, until they decided jurisdiction was just a suggestion. He let out a low whistle. You want me to call someone? No, I said. Let them make the next move. Martin kicked a loose board into the creek. This about power? I nodded. Always is. And as we stood there, muddy boots, sun dropping low, the last of the bridge floating away, I realized this wasn't just about some HOA getting overzealous. This was a warning shot, and they just fired it at the wrong damn judge. I should have known something was off last week. Even before the bridge fell, the signs were there. Quiet ones, the kind that whisper instead of scream. On Tuesday morning, just after sunrise, Martin and I had been replacing a busted fence post on the eastern boundary when we spotted 2 men in polos and khakis standing by the creek. They looked too clean to be ranchers and way too smug to be bird watchers. One held a clipboard, the other had a measuring wheel. From a distance, they had the posture of people who thought they belonged everywhere. Martin narrowed his eyes. You expecting surveyors? I shook my head. I'd know. We watched them for a moment, hidden behind the old tool shed. One of them was pointing toward my barn like he was appraising it. The other scribbled something down. Curious, I walked over casually, no aggression, just calm cowboy steps. Morning, I called out. The clipboard guy flinched. Oh, hello, just doing some routine perimeter checks for the county. His smile was forced, like a car salesman stuck in the wrong zip code. County doesn't check my perimeter, I said flatly. This is private land. He blinked twice, caught mid-land. The guy with the wheel turned around and said too quickly, we were told this was HOA, I didn't respond. Just pulled out my phone, opened the parcel map, and showed them this entire stretch is outside the Silverwood Preserve HOA. Always has been, always will be. They nodded nervously, muttered something about clerical errors, and shuffled off toward their Subaru parked across the field. Martin joined me a minute later. Well, he said, they sure measured something, mostly their own stupidity. I didn't chase them down, didn't call the sheriff. Not yet. Because I'd seen what I needed to see. The HOA wasn't just poking around. They were scouting, testing boundaries, gauging response time, like wolves sniffing a fence line, checking for weak points. And if they thought I was just going to roll over because they wore company polos and smelled like lemon-scented toner, they had a long damn week ahead of them. That evening, I checked the HOA's website. Not that I expected transparency, but I was curious. Sure enough, there was a new proposal draft under their 2025 Community Vision Plan. It included a curious little bullet point under Phase 3 expansion considerations. Incorporate adjacent properties into a unified community framework to streamline oversight and land stewardship. Land stewardship, I muttered. They make it sound like a public park, not my ranch. I printed the page, highlighted the line, and filed it next to the rest of my documentation. They weren't just expanding their influence. They were trying to absorb the ranch, one board vote and backdated document at a time. HOA annexation by clipboard. And the bridge, that wasn't an accident. That was Phase 1. The next morning, a white envelope showed up in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just one line typed across the front. Consider attending our community introduction meeting, Mr. Rourke. It's time. Martin read it over my shoulder and let out a dry laugh. They're not even hiding it anymore. I nodded, folding the letter slowly. No, and that means they're ready to move. He looked at me sideways. And you? I stared down the hill toward where the bridge used to be. I've been ready, but even I didn't expect what they'd try next and how far they'd go to push me out. I should have known something was off last week. Even before the bridge fell, the signs were there, quiet ones, the kind that whisper instead of scream. On Tuesday morning, just after sunrise, Martin and I had been replacing a busted fence post on the eastern boundary when we spotted two men in polos and khakis standing by the creek. They looked too clean to be ranchers and way too smug to be bird watchers. One held a clipboard, the other had a measuring wheel. From a distance, they had the posture of people who thought they belonged everywhere. Martin narrowed his eyes. You expecting surveyors? I shook my head. I'd know. We watched them for a moment, hidden behind the old tool shed. One of them was pointing toward my barn like he was appraising it. The other scribbled something down. Curious, I walked over casually. No aggression, just calm cowboy steps. Morning, I called out. The clipboard guy flinched. Oh, hello. Just doing some routine perimeter checks for the county. His smile was forced, like a car salesman stuck in the wrong zip code. County doesn't check my perimeter, I said flatly. This is private land. He blinked twice, caught mid-light. The guy with the wheel turned around and said too quickly, we were told this was HOA monitored. I didn't respond, just pulled out my phone, opened the parcel map, and showed him this entire stretch is outside the Silverwood Preserve HOA. Always has been, always will be. They nodded nervously, muttered something about clerical errors, and shuffled off toward their Subaru parked across the field. Martin joined me a minute later. Well, he said, they sure measured something, mostly their own stupidity. I didn't chase them down, didn't call the sheriff. Not yet, because I'd seen what I needed to see. The HOA wasn't just poking around. They were scouting, testing boundaries, gauging response time, like wolves sniffing a fence line, checking for weak points. And if they thought I was just going to roll over because they wore company polos and smelled like lemon-scented toner, they had a long damn week ahead of them. That evening, I checked the HOA's website. Not that I expected transparency, but I was curious. Sure enough, there was a new proposal draft under their 2025 Community Vision Plan. It included a curious little bullet point under Phase 3 expansion considerations. Incorporate adjacent properties into a unified community framework to streamline oversight and land stewardship. Land stewardship, I muttered. They make it sound like a public park, not my ranch. I printed the page, highlighted the line, and filed it next to the rest of my documentation. They weren't just expanding their influence, they were trying to absorb the ranch. One board vote and backdated document at a time. HOA annexation by clipboard. And the bridge? That wasn't an accident. That was phase one. The next morning, a white envelope showed up in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just one line typed across the front. Consider attending our community introduction meeting, Mr. Rourke. It's time. Martin read it over my shoulder and let out a dry laugh. They're not even hiding it anymore, I nodded, folding the letter slowly. No, and that means they're ready to move. He looked at me sideways. And you? I stared down the hill toward where the bridge used to be. I've been ready, but even I didn't expect what they'd try next and how far they'd go to push me out. I don't scare easy. Grew up with tornado drills, wild coyotes, and two older brothers who thought wrestling was a form of affection. But that note, its Tom sat like a tick behind my eyes for days. So I did what any rational man with a law degree and a bad feeling would do. I got proactive. I called in a favor with an old friend in tech security, and by sundown, I had 5 motion-activated trail cams positioned along my property, 2 by the creek, 1 at the old pump house, and a final pair around the tool shed. I also printed out a fresh set of laminated signs that read, "Crime scene, federal property, trespassing will be prosecuted." They weren't subtle, but neither was dynamite. Martin helped me hammer them in with quiet grins and occasional sarcasm. Think we should have added glitter? Maybe some flamingos to make it pop? I shot him a look. Karen's allergic to style, not stupidity. That night, I stayed up with coffee and paperwork, waiting for a ping from the cameras. Nothing. Not a squirrel out of place. But something in the air told me they weren't done. I found out how right I was the next night. It was close to midnight when I heard the blast, the kind of boom that makes your bones vibrate, and shook the windows. I grabbed my flashlight, boots already half on, and sprinted outside with Martin hot on my heels, still in pajama pants, and a "Don't Tread on Me" hoodie. The flames were already licking the sky before we hit the ridge. My tool shed, old but solid, built by my father and patched with my own hands, was now a bonfire. Orange sparks danced into the night, feeding off dry wood, diesel fumes, and rage. Martin swore under his breath and dashed for the barn hose. I stood frozen for a beat, watching a memory burn. That shed held 3 generations of fencing wire, anvil tools, and my grandfather's old branding irons. It wasn't just firewood. It was family. I snapped out of it and joined him with the hose, spraying what we could, but it was like spitting on a house fire. By the time the local fire crew arrived 20 minutes later, all they could do was contain the perimeter. When the blaze finally coughed its last smoke, nothing was left but charred ash and warped metal. We waited for sunrise to assess the scene. Among the ruins, we found a scorched gas can half melted into the dirt and the faint blackened remains of a cheap fuse cord. This wasn't electrical. It wasn't accidental. This was planned, deliberate. A message written in gasoline, and it was delivered with the same clipboard confidence as everything else. Back in my office, I plugged the trail cam footage into my desktop. I didn't expect much, maybe a shadow or distant motion. But there it was, clear as daylight, one of the same men from the surveying stunt. He appeared around 11:17 p.m., ducking low behind the back corral, carrying what looked like a jug in one hand and a bag in the other. 10 minutes later, a flash burst through the screen like lightning. He ran off, fumbling with the fence gate like a clumsy ghost. I paused the frame and zoomed in. Same hoodie, same cheap khakis, same smug posture like HOA issued them with every clipboard. Martin leaned over my shoulder, eyes narrowed. You think HOA sent him? I think HOA set the tone, I said, and someone ran with it. I printed the images, labeled them with timestamps, and placed them in a separate folder marked Arson Evidence. My fingers clenched as I sealed the envelope. I wasn't just defending my ranch anymore. I was investigating a crime scene. They crossed a line, and not just the property one. Before I could even decide who to call first, fire chief, sheriff, or U.S. Marshal, my phone buzzed with a notification from the trail cam system. Motion detected, north pasture. Another alert followed, then a third. I looked up at Martin. They're not done. He blinked. You mean they're back? No, I said, reaching for my boots. I mean, this just turned into a federal crime scene, and now we bait the trap. The morning after the fire, I didn't sleep. I'd been up reviewing footage, filing digital reports, tagging evidence folders like a man prepping for trial, which in many ways I was. The ranch smelled like smoke and scorched memories, but the real heat hadn't even started yet. Around 9 a.m., while Martin was out at the feed store, I caught movement by the southern fence line. Not a raccoon, not a neighbor. Trucks, 4 of them, all white, all branded. Ridgecom Technologies with Silverwood HOA partner printed on the doors, like that meant anything out here. 5 workers in yellow vests milled around the telephone pole near the barn, hauling gear out of their flatbeds. I watched from the kitchen window with the cold mug of yesterday's coffee in my hand, jaw clenched. One of them was on a ladder already. Halfway through unbolting the Wi-Fi booster box I'd paid for and installed 6 years ago with a personal commercial contract from FrontierNet, none of it was. I stepped out onto the porch and walked down the hill slow, boots heavy in the dirt. They didn't even notice me until I was within 10 feet. "Morning," I said evenly. They all turned like kids caught toilet paper in a house. One of them, younger guy, maybe early 30s with a clipboard and anxious eyes, cleared his throat. "We're here to decommission and remove unauthorized tech under the Ridgecom Upgrade Initiative for HOA-aligned properties." I tilted my head. "And which part of my land did you think was HOA-aligned?" He blinked. "Sir, we were told." "Wrong answer," I snapped. I raised my phone and started recording. "Who gave you permission to enter this property and touch equipment that doesn't belong to you or your company?" He froze. The guy on the ladder climbed down faster than gravity. Another one started mumbling something about a district update and integration maps. I showed him my parcel ID, property lines, and the original signed contract with FrontierNet. "You're trespassing, and you're stealing." One of them dropped a drill and backed away. Within 3 minutes, they were packed up and gone, kicking up gravel in their hurry like the devil himself was behind them, and for once he might have been. An hour later, I got an envelope slip under my gate. This time it had the HOA logo in full color, crisp, embossed, and smug as hell. Inside was a notice of violation and fee assessment. Apparently, I owed the HOA $22,500, 0 cents for back dues, unauthorized structures, and repeated violations of neighborhood aesthetic integrity. They even cited the barn paint color and accused me of flagrantly displaying aggressive rural imagery, which I assumed was code for my American flag. And the final line, "Failure to pay within 30 days may result in lien and seizure proceedings under Section 12C of the Silverwood Preserve Compliance Charter." I laughed. A real one this time, loud, deep, and possibly a little unstable. They thought a lien scare would work on me? They thought I'd fold like a nervous first-time homeowner? I scanned the document, highlighted the legal overreach, and began assembling a counterclaim, not just a defense, but a trap. I submitted a formal complaint to the Department of Justice, attached every clip, every timestamp, and included the footage of the Ridgecom workers removing equipment they didn't own. I labeled it unauthorized entry with intent to disrupt federal investigation. Then I updated the camera system, doubled the perimeter alarms, and printed off one more sign. Bigger this time. "Smile, Karen. This is a federal wire fraud case now." Martin read it as he returned from town and let out a low whistle. "They're poking a bear and thinking it's a stuffed animal." "No," I said, stapling the sign to the barn post. "They're poking a judge with a courtroom and a war chest." That night, I got a text from an unknown number. It just read, "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I screenshot it and forwarded it to my DOJ contact without blinking, but deep down, I knew something bigger was coming because they weren't just playing dirty. They were starting to panic, and panicked people make messy, beautiful mistakes. The text message had barely cooled on my phone before I got the official court notice. The injunction hearing was scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m., Federal District Court, Denver. No delays, no continuances, just straight to the lion's den. That's how I preferred it anyway. I'd already sent my evidence packet, drone footage, trespassing logs, the Ridgecom incident, the HOA's fraudulent lien notice, and every backdated zoning proposal they thought no one would check. My lawyer, Ethan Grant, flew in from D.C. the next morning, clean cut, sharp as a scalpel, and looked like the type of guy HOA boards hated on sight. We shook hands on my front porch while Martin handed him sweet tea and said, "Don't worry, he bites back." Friday came fast. I wore a plain navy suit, no robe, no pins, just a man walking into the ring. But I'll admit, I didn't expect a crowd. The courtroom lobby was packed, ranchers in boots, reporters with tripods, a family holding a sign that said HOA took our treehouse too. Word had spread fast. The bridge judge, as they nicknamed me, was suing the Silverwood Preserve HOA for federal overreach, destruction of historical property, and attempted fraudulent land seizure. Apparently, people had been waiting for someone to punch back, and this time the punch was wearing a tie. The HOA team strutted in around 9:45, all three of them. Edith Branson, our local Karen Queen and self-proclaimed compliance chair, led the charge, followed by her attorney and the Ridgecom rep, who still looked like he hadn't recovered from our last encounter. Edith wore a salmon-colored pantsuit and a face that could curdle milk. She refused to look at me as they passed, but her clipboard poked out of her handbag like a weapon of mass micromanagement. Ethan leaned in and muttered, "She brought a clipboard to federal court?" "She brings it to the mailbox," I replied. "Pretty sure it has her horoscope printed on the back." When Judge Emily Carver entered, the room snapped quiet. She was a no-nonsense type, early 60s, sharp glasses, and the kind of stare that could unpeel wallpaper. She glanced at me, gave the faintest nod, then called the session to order. Ethan opened strong, laid everything out with precision. The video of an authorized entry, the Ridgecom theft, the historic bridge registration, the trail cam capturing the arsonist, and the phony violation letter. He even held up a printed HOA community integration plan that included a map with my land already marked as Phase 3B. Judge Carver raised an eyebrow. Was the property owner ever informed or invited to discuss this expansion? "Not once, Your Honor," Ethan said. "Unless you count anonymous threats and back-alley telecom sabotage." The HOA attorney bumbled through a defense involving clerical errors, miscommunication, and a sincere misunderstanding of boundary documentation. When he claimed the bridge was a public safety hazard, I nearly laughed out loud. Judge Carver didn't. She closed her binder slowly, then turned her eyes on Edith like a heat lamp on a snowman. "You destroyed a federally registered landmark, distributed a fraudulent lien, and coordinated utility removal on land you have no jurisdiction over. That's not miscommunication. That's criminal negligence wrapped in entitlement." Silence. Edith's clipboard didn't have a comeback. Effective immediately, Judge Carver ruled, Silverwood Preserve HOA is prohibited from conducting any further enforcement, communication, or land modification related to Judge Rourke's property. Any future action without explicit court approval will be considered a violation of federal order. The room erupted as the gavel dropped. I didn't smile, not yet, just nodded, collected my documents, and walked out quietly. The cameras followed, so did the whispers. He beat the HOA. Finally, someone nailed him. Bet that bridge meant more than they knew. Outside, Martin was leaning on the truck, arms crossed, grinning like a fox in a henhouse. "You look like a man who just turned HOA into 3 letters that mean hell of an apology," I chuckled. "It's not over. This was the first swing." He handed me a folder that had been left at the gate during the hearing. No return address. Inside, a blurry photo of our cattle gate, wide open, and under it, in thick black ink, "We're not done." I showed it to Ethan. He frowned. "They're making mistakes now." I nodded. "Good. That means they're bleeding, and it means we just made this personal." We barely had time to breathe after the court ruling. One minute, I was fielding emails from journalists and legal contacts. The next, I was staring at a photo someone had slid under my gate like a mob warning. My cattle gate wide open and the ink threat, "We're not done." I didn't have to guess what that meant. 2 nights later, I got the answer loud and clear. It was 3:18 a.m. when Martin burst into my room, out of breath and wild-eyed. "Gate's open," he wheezed. "Back pasture. They're gone." I didn't ask who. I already knew. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my jacket, and we were in the truck within 90 seconds, headlights carving through the fog like twin sabers. The herd had scattered. Over 50 head of cattle were now God knows where across hills, trails, and pine breaks. The back gate had been cut clean, bolts snipped, chain discarded like an afterthought. We followed fresh hoof prints until the road turned to gravel and the gravel turned to mud. It took nearly 4 hours to round him up, coax him back, and fix the damn gate under moonlight. Martin worked silently, jaw locked, his knuckles white on the steering wheel every time a calf wandered off. I wasn't much better. I've dealt with threats, courtroom games, even land-grab lawyers, but this was different. This wasn't just an HOA power play anymore. This was sabotage, animal endangerment, property damage, And if we'd hit one cow on that gravel road, man, sunlight was cracking the horizon by the time we finally got the last steer through the gate. I was checking the latch when Martin froze mid-step by the ATV. "Tom," he said slowly, pointing at the dashboard. "That's not mine." Wedged behind the ignition panel was a small black rectangle with a blinking red dot. It looked like a key fob, but my gut already knew better. I pried it loose with a pocket knife and turned it over in my hand. GPS tracker, industrial grade, not the kind of thing you buy at Best Buy. Martin let out a low whistle. "They're tracking us now?" "Or someone is," I said. "And they're not subtle anymore." Back at the barn, I swept the area for anything else and found it. Tucked inside the weather vane above the hayloft was a second tracker, barely visible. Someone had climbed up there, probably at night, and planted it where it could log every move every time we rolled out. I bagged both devices, labeled the bags, and called Hannah Thomas, my DOJ contact. She didn't pick up, but I left a message that started with, "We've crossed into surveillance territory," and ended with, "They're escalating faster than I expected." I sent her photos, GPS coordinates, and a short video of the blinking lights still active. Then I shut down all outside internet feeds and put the ranch on lockdown. That night, Martin and I sat on the porch, staring at the fields we'd just recovered. "You think they'll try again?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. The wind was picking up. A storm was building somewhere past the ridge. "They've already gone this far," I said finally. "Now they're desperate. And desperate people don't pull back. They double down." He nodded slowly. "So what now?" I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, eyes fixed on the tree line. "Now we let them. Let them make the next mistake, because I'm done playing defense." But before I could finish the thought, a low buzz filled the sky. Then another. We both looked up as a drone zipped overhead, scanning the property like a vulture with rotors. Then a second one joined. I stood up slowly. "Looks like the next mistake just clocked in for work." The drones didn't last long. By day 3, we'd already netted 4 of them. 2 with signal jammers, 1 with an old lacrosse stick Martin refused to admit he was scarily good with, and 1 that simply flew too low and found the wrong end of a shovel. We handed them all over to the feds with serial numbers and a receipt of smug satisfaction. But I wasn't going to let the surveillance define the next move. The bridge was gone, the pass burned, but I still had one card left, the one thing they never saw coming. A community with nothing left to lose and everything to build. I didn't ask for help. Didn't have to. Word spread faster than wildfire on dry brush. The day after the cattle incident, a group of locals showed up unannounced. Ranchers, carpenters, retired welders, even the high school shop teacher with his entire class in tow. One of them, a woman named Darlene, who once sued the HOA over a compost bin, showed up with chili for everyone and a cordless drill holstered like a sidearm. We didn't talk revenge. We talked restoration. We laid out planks, poured fresh supports, took turns mixing concrete in borrowed wheelbarrows. Someone tied an American flag to the backhoe. Another hung a sign that read, "They burned history, we built it back." It was on day 4 of construction, right as we were laying new foundation beams, that one of the teenagers struck something metallic beneath the old east piling. At first, we thought it was just leftover scrap from the original bridge, but when we pried it loose, it turned out to be a rusted steel box, sealed tight. Took a crowbar and a blowtorch to open it, but when we did, the whole crew went quiet. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and time, was a letter. My grandfather's handwriting, still sharp even after all these years. It read, "To my sons and grandsons. If you ever find this, it means someone tried to tear down what keeps us together. Don't let them. Bridges aren't just wood, they're roots." I didn't speak, just passed the letter around. Martin sniffed once and said something about sawdust getting in his eye. We mounted a copy of the letter into a frame and promised to bolt it onto the bridge once finished. And then I made a call back to Hannah Thomas at the DOJ. She picked up this time, and before I could even ask how the investigation was going, she said, "Judge, we found something." I stepped away from the noise of the build site, heart already tightening. "Go on." We traced HOA financial activity from the last 2 years. A large chunk, over $300,000, 0 cents, was funneled through a shell company registered in Florida, Gold String Developments, LLC. You know what they specialize in? Let me guess, I said. Land acquisition and rural redevelopment. Bingo. They've got ties to 3 other HOAs currently under review for fraudulent foreclosure schemes and property flips. I let that sink in. This wasn't just HOA entitlement. This was a pipeline. My bridge wasn't a nuisance. It was a speed bump. My land wasn't unwanted. It was a target. I looked out across the field where families were hammering, sanding, rebuilding with callous hands and quiet resolve. You got enough for Rico? I asked. She hesitated. We're close, but we need more. Then keep your phone on, I said. They're not done making mistakes. That evening, we hosted a cookout on the half-finished bridge, just burgers, beer, and banjos. No speeches, no grandstanding, just neighbors showing up for each other like it used to be. Under the stars, with smoke curling into the night sky and laughter echoing off the ridge, I started to believe we might just pull this off. But peace doesn't sit long around here. Around 11:00 p.m., Martin came back from locking up the barn with a strange look on his face. You might want to see this, he said. He held up a manila envelope, no return address, postmarked from Miami. Inside was a single piece of paper, bold font, black ink. We're ready to make you an offer. Below that, a number, 7 figures, and a corporate logo I'd seen before, Gold Stream Developments. Looks like they're done playing cute, Martin muttered. I stared at the paper for a long time, then folded it once and slid it into the fire pit without a word. Let him watch it burn. The offer letter from Goldstream barely made it to ash before the next storm rolled in, this time on wheels. 3 days later, we were tightening the final bolts on the bridge when the rumble of diesel engines cut through the morning like a bad omen. Down the gravel path came 2 graders, a bulldozer, and a flatbed with an excavator chained to its back like a war elephant. And behind it all, standing in the open bed of a white pickup, arms crossed like he thought this was his victory lap, was Ed Branson. HOA clipboard king turned demolition dictator. I stepped off the bridge, wiping sawdust from my hands as the machines halted just yards from the new timber span. "Morning, Ed," I called. "Didn't expect you to bring the circus." He hopped down with a smirk that could sour milk. "Tom, or should I say Judge Rourke, we received reports that this structure was built without proper municipal authorization. It's unsafe. It has to come down." I raised an eyebrow. "Mother Bellum, you think you're City Hall now?" He handed me a folder, all smug and starch. Inside, printed screenshots of a fabricated safety violation report and a backdated zoning rejection, both conveniently stamped with the HOA logo. I held it up. "You forged this?" "We filed it with the county this morning," he said proudly. "Updated district lines. Your land is now part of Silverwood Preserve." Martin stepped forward, fists already curling. "You changed a boundary map and thought that made it real?" Ed shrugged. "The board approved it." I looked around. Volunteers had stopped work, and kids from the high school shop class stared, wide-eyed, tools still in hand. The community that had rebuilt this bridge, every hammer swing, every nail, was watching. And Ed thought he could roll up with a bulldozer and rewrite reality. That's when the black SUVs arrived. 2 of them. No sirens, just presence. Doors opened, and out stepped 2 U.S. Marshals and Hannah Thomas, crisp as ever, badge gleaming in the sun. She held up a document. "Ed Branson," she said flatly, "you are under arrest for trespassing on federally protected land, attempted destruction of historic infrastructure, obstruction of a federal investigation, and conspiracy to defraud through misuse of zoning authority." Ed smirked, finally cracked. "This is ridiculous. This is my job." "No," Hannah said, slipping cuffs on his wrists. "Your job was issuing parking fines and measuring grass. You escalated into racketeering." The machines were impounded, the crews scattered within hours, news vans lined the road, and for the first time, Silverwood wasn't a suburb, it was ground zero. The DOJ dropped the official press release the next morning. Goldstream Developments and its affiliates, including 3 HOAs across state lines, were under federal RICO investigation for fraud, surveillance, coercion, and attempted unlawful seizure of private property. The bridge incident had cracked the dam wide open. But I wasn't done yet. I met with a state university the following week, an institution with a strong law and history program, and sold them a 5-acre portion of my land adjacent to the creek. The terms were clear. The area would be transformed into the Federal Heritage and Land Defense Center, a field lab and legal archive dedicated to rural property rights, historical preservation, and land defense legislation. The bridge would remain not just as a symbol, but as a classroom, a reminder, a landmark that said, they tried, they failed, we rebuilt. The ribbon cutting was quiet, no suits, no press, just the people who mattered, the ranchers, the students, the retirees with blisters and calluses. As the sun dipped below the ridge, I stepped onto the bridge one final time, pulled a small golden nail from my jacket, and held it up to the lantern light. It was engraved with the words, "This time it's built to last." Martin handed me the hammer, and I drove it in 3 steady hits, no speech, no drama. Just the echo of legacy being locked into place. Later that evening, I sat at my desk, the bridge lights glowing in the distance, and wrote one last letter to the DOJ. I thanked them, not just for their work, but for believing a judge could still be a neighbor, a steward, a defender. Before sealing it, I paused and added one final line. We didn't just win a case, we set a precedent. But even as the ink dried, I had a feeling it wasn't the end. The land was safe for now, but somewhere out there, someone else in some other neighborhood was getting a notice. Another HOA, another clipboard, another battle. And they were going to need a blueprint. Good thing I had one built from steel, wood, and fire. In the end, this wasn't just about a bridge. It was about standing your ground when bullies come dressed in clipboards and fine print. It was about saying no, not with fists, but with facts, law, and the kind of grit they don't teach in HOA bylaws. Because legacy doesn't live in paperwork, it lives in what we build, protect, and pass on. I didn't win because I was louder. I won because I didn't fold, and neither should you. If you've ever dealt with an out-of-control HOA, tell your story in the comments. This channel is where suburban nightmares meet small-town justice. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true HOA tales that'll make your blood boil and your petty side cheer. And remember, you don't need to raise your voice when the gavel's already yours.